I'm really excited about this opera because I love doing stuff that I've never done before, and I don't know how many operas I've done. I think it's around 100. But this is my first mariachi opera. And I've known about this piece for a long time because I have a long association with Houston Grand Opera, where it was commissioned and premiered. And so I've always been fascinated with the piece. And so to have the opportunity to do it here in Austin is a real joy for me and for all of us at the company. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of idea of why we're here and why Cruzar. A lot of this is our commitment in the at Austin Opera that this is a living and growing art form, right? It's an old one. It's over 400 years old, but it is living and growing, right? And so part of that is that it has to continue expanding the stories that it tells. And the stories and about whom and from whom and by whom these stories come. And so it's a very enriching thing to learn about these other cultures through this lens of this art form we call opera. And so, oh, wow. Now I sound like God. No kidding. No. Don't tell my wife I said that. She already thinks it's a mess. And so we've been very interested in doing Spanish language programming on the main stage for a long time. And there are some challenges to that. One of the challenges is the repertoire is not nearly as developed as sort of the Western European canon that kind of tends to be the mainstay of opera performed in America. And so that was one challenge, and that we really decided that we wanted to get involved with addressing at Austin Opera. And so we were very grateful to receive a very generous gift from Sarah and Ernest Butler to start the Spanish Language Programming Fund. And this is something that endows this adventure for us. And there are multiple elements to that. And one of the things that started happening early, even before this was all official, were these concerts at the consulate that were established and very, very popular. I've not been able to get a ticket when I'm in town, so I hear it's amazing. But this is something, again, of connecting to this community. We engaged Claudia Chapa as a curator for this part of the work that we're doing. And if you remember, last April, we filmed this PBS special, Bella Noche de Musica, at the Waterloo Amphitheater with the orchestra with Trio Chapultepec. And that was our first foray into a partnership with the Opera de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, where we brought some artists from there to join us in that concert. And that concert is now out. It's been seen in a lot of markets and by many, many people, and it's a really special project for us. We have something else upcoming, which is the Opera ATX Latinx Creative Residency. And this comes back to what I was talking about originally, in that when you need to expand the repertoire, where do you start? And you start with emboldening the pipeline, right? And creating the way that these works get done. And so this was something that we had talked about a little bit in other formats, and it was like an idea that finally found a home and a why. And so this is something, we have 2 composer librettist teams who will join us over the next year and change in Austin for a residency. And it was a very interesting thing to go through this experience of putting an application out there that was specific enough that people knew that they would want to apply and how and with what, but vague enough that we didn't completely direct them to what we wanted. Because it's important that the creators are the ones generating the stories that are developed and told, right? It's a much more successful way to do it than us going to someone and saying, we think you should write an opera about X, right? It's not that that's never successful, but we do know just empirically that it's much better to put it in the hands of the creators and say, what story must you tell? And so we're really excited about having those residencies coming up and about giving them space and resources to develop the ideas that they bring to us. And now finally, we're really, really happy to finally be putting Spanish language programming on the Long Center main stage series at Austin Opera, and that is with Cruzar la Cara de la Luna. And this is well, we're going to get into this, so I won't go too deeply into what it is and the format quite yet. But one thing I do find really universal about the opera is just the thematic material. And Cruzar tells the story of a multi-generational Mexican-American family who's separated by countries, cultures, and consequences in search of new possibilities. And there are so many universal themes in here that we can all relate to, including home. Can you go home? Right? This is something we think a lot about in our world today. So we're really thrilled to be presenting this. It's an incredibly vibrant production. We're going to talk a little bit more about the details later. But to dig further into mariachi, opera, the fusion of these two, I want to invite a very special guest, José Torres, who is the lecturer of musicology and ethnomusicology at University of Texas, Austin. He is a very recognized mariachi performer himself, who has performed with a lot of the most prolific ensembles in the world. And he's done a lot of interesting work, a lot of great research that's been funded by some very distinguished fellowships. And one of the things I love about Jose's work is that he's really focused on his passion for how sound and embodiment and a musical performance reveal shared values and experience, which to me is kind of what it's all about. So I'm very excited to have him here, and we're gonna all learn a lot tonight. So please welcome José Torres.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Welcome to my living room. Have a seat.
How did all these people get in my dressing room?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I want to sort of light the fuse here a little bit.
Sure.
And then let you go. And I think it would be really helpful for us to understand origin and history of mariachi as an art form, and a little bit of the development of it. And then I know you've got some very special guests also with you tonight.
Yeah, well, for those of you that are not familiar with mariachi music, the tradition itself is really, it's not that old. It goes back to about the middle of the 19th century. There's kind of traces or obviously influences that date back farther. There's some researchers and scholars that kind of want to tie it a little bit back farther, but in a real simple way, it starts in the middle of the 19th century, really as a peasant tradition, as a regional peasant tradition in northwestern Mexico, in the areas of Jalisco, Nayarit, Guerrero, Michoacan. Those are all those states are kind of collectively together close to the coast of the Pacific coast of Mexico. And when we think of mariachi really as an art form, I would say at that time it probably wasn't really an art form. It was a music that accompanied life celebrations. It wasn't commercialized yet, so it was really a music that was performed among families, among communities, very much a community type of music, and where it becomes commercialized is really during the turn of the century, and it's really the consequence of a larger chain of events. As all these things happen, it's part of a larger kind of world. Right after the revolution of 1910 in Mexico, the revolutionary government that's now been installed and somewhat institutionalized is now, there was so much displacement and so much upheaval during that 10-year revolution in Mexico that the government is really trying to promote Mexican identity and bring people together and nationalism and just try to, I guess, re-inculcate the country, so to speak. And so part of what was done is a movement in the arts. So film, music, food, dance, all of these things were honestly cherry-picked because it wasn't really like, there wasn't these kind of national types of traditions or national folklore, if you will. But again, and this is something that happens in throughout the world, in all countries, even the United States. These particular traditions were kind of brought in as representatives of national culture. And mariachi really becomes popular as a consequence of the cinema, because a genre of films utilizing the figure of the Mexican charro, which was a real historic figure, the Mexican charro in Mexico. But there's a genre of films called comedias rancheras, which are the ranch comedies. And very, very similar to the cowboy westerns, singing westerns that we would see here in the US, although slightly different. I don't want to equate them too much, but there's definitely a lot of similarities between the two genres. And so these films, featured a particular protagonist, usually a male, singing charro, accompanied by live musicians. A little bit different maybe than the Roy Rogers and Gene Autry films that we would see, because it would maybe be somebody with a guitar, or maybe like a smaller group, but these singing charros would have like a full mariachi ensemble. And of course, they utilized musicians that were from this tradition. However, one of the big changes that happened during that time is that, of course, they would wear the peasant dress. And so there's a little bit of classism involved in these movies, because the charro was a landowner, was very formal, wealthy, and so you couldn't have him accompanied by these peasant musicians. Visually that didn't look very, very good. And so the musicians were dressed in the same style of dress, the traje de charro. And from there, to wrap that up kind of in a nutshell, although it's a lot longer history, the whole mariachi, what we understand now as the modern version of mariachi, kind of took off and became commercialized. The whole musical industry for many, many years, from the 1930s all the way into the 1990s. Now mariachi, what I mean to say during that entire time is that mariachi music, it's really what's called as música ranchera, ranch music. But that whole genre of music dominated Mexico. It was the dominant commercial musical form, not only in Mexico, but throughout Latin America. And then, of course, into the 90s, what's now kind of part of the reason that it's died is because the cinema went away. The Mexican cinema went away, and so it doesn't have this kind of engine that was manufacturing these artists and music and CDs and albums and so forth. And so what's kind of starting to take its place now is banda music. Banda music is now kind of the popular genre in Mexico, but Mexico now has kind of become like the classical music of Mexico. So it's still very prestigious. If you'll forgive me for saying this, it's starting to be very similar to classical music in the sense that it's not necessarily, it's not a mainstream commercial, well, it's lost its kind of commercial currency, but still practiced on a daily basis. So just like we see mariachis performing here at birthdays and celebrations and so forth, that's still very much a big part of Mexican culture, as well as, kind of the more commercialized theater productions and even still coming out in movies and things like that. But it's just not as dominant as it was. And of course, that translated here into the United States. And, where mariachi is most prominent here in the United States is in the schools, because mariachi has now been given a space within music education programs. And so I'm a product actually of that movement. So I did not come from a mariachi family. I learned mariachi actually my senior year in high school was when I was first introduced to mariachi. Yeah, I learned band. I was a band trumpet player from 6th grade into high school, and a lot of my friends were in the mariachi program, and my parents wouldn't let me, for not because they didn't like it, they just, it's just they wouldn't let me go and participate. And then my last year of high school, I was introduced to that, and it kind of took off from there, and it's been a passion of mine ever since. And a lot of us that are born in the U.S. that kind of went through that track, all of us can relate to the fact that once we get involved with mariachi, it really kind of pulls us in and we're just kind of like, we can't help it. Like that's okay. It's like when you meet that one that she's the one. It's like okay, I'm done. There's nothing I can do anymore. So that's kind of the way it's been. So a little bit of long history there, but I have a degree in history, so.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's exactly what we wanted to hear, and it's very useful to have that underpinning to the conversation.
Sure.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about musical form and the way it's embodied in mariachi, because for example, in studying Cruzar, like all of the different forms, rhythms, styles, there is a wealth there, a variety, and I'd love to hear sort of encapsulated, what should we be expecting or listening for?
Well, to give you a little bit of an understanding of again, just because I'm a researcher in mariachi, so I'm going to be a little bit of a teacher here. I want to clarify. We do call it mariachi music, and everybody calls it mariachi. In Mexico, it's also referred to as mariachi music. But the actual genre itself is música ranchera, or la música mexicana, which is the Mexican music. And so when you speak to people in Mexico, and it would be like the American music, and you're like, what's the American music? But in Mexico, and people who are enculturated, it's understood. When you say la música mexicana, you're talking about música ranchera, you're talking about mariachi music. And so the term for the genre is really, again, música ranchera or música mexicana. But the thing about this commercialization of mariachi is there's a lot of regional folkloric or folk music in Mexico. Mexico is rich with different types of musical forms, genres, and mariachi has come to incorporate that through the commercialism because they've just adopted a lot of these kind of musical forms. The actual mariachi from the peasant tradition really only played polkas, which are the polkas like the European polkas, and what is known as the son, and a particular type of son. The son is not son doesn't translate to song. Canción is a song, but son it's a danced music form. And Mexico has a lot of these regional sones. Like if you've heard La Bamba is a regional son. It's a son jarocho. It's from Veracruz. Jarocho means someone who's from Veracruz. So the son that the mariachi plays is the son Jalisciense, Jalisco. And so it has different rhythms and kind of a different feel. And of course, it's performed by the mariachi. The jarocho's performed by the jarocho groups that you see dressed all in white with the hats and the harp and the jarana and so forth. The mariachi has incorporated a lot of these rhythms within its own performance practice, so that mariachis, we play jarocho. We don't play it like the jarochos do because it's a different ensemble and it's a different style. In Veracruz, it's a mariachi version of jarocho with trumpets and vihuela and guitar, and it's performed slightly differently, but the feel is still there and it's still danced similarly. So the message I'm trying to get across is that all of these rhythms and kind of different song forms and dance song forms, they become utilized in different kinds of commercialized arrangements. So for example, I could maybe write a song and put write it in the style of a son jalisciense and use a son jalisciense rhythm and kind of a son jalisciense interpretation. Or I could write it in the style of a huapango, and a huapango is also from the Huasteca region. And these different styles are really defined by the rhythms that are played by the guitars. In other words, what we recognize it as a huapango by the rhythm that the vihuelas and the guitar and the guitarrón are performing. So as a trumpet player, my phrasing and everything, then I have to adapt myself to what they're doing. So my interpretation comes from the way I hear what they're playing. And that becomes a convention. So I'm not saying, when I say it's not like I'm doing this. I'm saying that's the convention. And so you can write songs in the style of a huapango. You can write songs in the style of a polka. You can write songs in the style of a bolero, which is not necessarily originally from Mexico, but there's a Mexican bolero. And so when you see the opera, the rhythms, or rather what I should say is the songs are written in these different types of song forms. So what Pepe probably did is he just said, I want to write this particular piece during this particular scene. I'm going to use a huapango rhythm. And then he just writes the arrangement under that particular style. If we want it to sound a little bit more Mexican, a little bit more original, then maybe like a polka, if it's something danced. So, and then of course, the boleros are not necessarily danced, right? I mean, you can dance them romantically, but they're really more, to be heard and transmitting emotion. So it really, so the rhythms that we use as a composer would just depend on what are the ideas that we're trying to transmit. And of course, we have a lot of songs in Mexico that are very, very sad with very, very powerful, energetic rhythms. So you could write a song with a very, very depressing theme, and you write it in the style of the son, which is really lively and really energetic, and zapateados, which is stomp dancing, and everybody thinks, wow, what a great song. It's like, yeah, we're singing about death, you know? And there is a little bit of fatalism in Mexican culture, although there is a scholar out there who really pushes back against that kind of stereotyped idea, but I would gently argue that it does exist. So death is always kind of present, although this particular scholar that I'm thinking of right now, he strongly disagrees with that argument, and I respect it. But from my own research and the work that I've done, because Mexico is very spiritual, so death is kind of always present. It's not that we're all looking forward to it or anything like that, but we always recognize that it's there. Like, it's like, okay, we're all going there. We all know where we're going, right? And our culture's different, right? We tend to avoid, a little bit of those subjects. I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but I just wanted to throw that out there. But the way the opera was composed was kind of using these different types of forms, which are all within the mariachi performance practice. And then, of course, as Tim mentioned, the research that I focus on is that it's an embodied way of performing, so that because we don't in the tradition, it's normally an oral tradition, and so traditionally musicians learn by ear, and so it's not necessarily it's not being transmitted through the written word, so to speak. And so because of that, the music is embodied. When I teach my students, I'm always telling them, you can't see sound, you can feel sound, like because it goes in through your ear and then you feel the vibration in your body. So when you're performing the music, you're feeling the music when you play it in your body. And so when we perform, it's an embodied way of performance. And then, of course, like I said, a lot of these particular music forms that we play are dance. Their origins are as dance to music. So it's supposed to be embodied, like you're supposed to feel it and move with it. And when you sing, it's the same way. It's like this kind of embodied performance. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because in learning this piece and in speaking with the orchestrator, who's been involved with Cruzar for many, many years in a musical capacity, far before there was the idea of orchestrating it. But looking at it, and there are some things that cannot be notated in what we think of when we think about Western musical notation, right? A series of black dots indicating a pitch and a rhythm or length of a note, et cetera, right? And that's just simply, it doesn't really capture the music. And it's been very, very interesting as I started listening to, bootlegs of Mariachi Vargas, and to really try and understand musically what was happening. That there's some of this stuff that, because it has to be put on the page to pass it along, you can, but it's not actually the way it happens. And what's interesting is what you're saying is that there's a very oral tradition that is far surpasses the information that happens there. And it's been interesting to observe the artists in rehearsal and how they take something that, if they did it exactly how it was on the page, it would seem very square. Right. But then there's all of a sudden this lengthening of certain syllables, this sort of feeling, or this the sense of rubato in mariachi is so different than how we, I think as a classical musician, I was taught that, you think about Chopin, right? Which is the idea of that I'm going to take a little time in the middle of this phrase and then I'm going to give it back at the end, right? But it's very, very different, right? I mean, like it's a almost completely different concept in mariachi.
Yeah, I'm glad that, number one, the first thing I'm really glad that you said, and this is very important, is that written notation cannot capture all music. And as an ethnomusicologist, which is my training, I'm an anthropologist of music. So I'm really studying music within culture, within how it impacts people's lives. And so one of our kind of tenets is this idea that written notation, it can't capture some as he said, this was not meant to be written. It wasn't meant to be notated. And of course, the Western European tradition has a certain idea of how sound is notated. And not all music traditions in the world follow that particular system of notation. So a lot of times classical musicians, when they play mariachi music, have a very hard time adjusting, because it would be like me playing Cuban salsa music or Puerto Rican salsa music. There's like a way in which you have to turn a note. And when I look at the hips of a young lady dancing salsa, I get it. I'm like, that's it right there. Gotta move that horn I gotta move that air exactly. And I'm making a joke, but I'm also being very serious because it's true. And that's part of it, is that when it's danced, there's a reason why commercial music is the way it is, because it's embodied and it's danced. And so the way it's interpreted is, through that kind of embodied feel, and notation doesn't capture that. Notation is a very visual medium and a very kind of intellectual, kind of mental exercise, where you're trying to focus and with your mind decipher the codes that are written in front of you. So you're not really connected to your body in that moment, although we do teach, you're supposed to feel the music, but like we're really kind of reinforcing, like looking at this graph and making sure that we're playing it exactly the way it is. So that's part of that, and the other piece about the rubato is really important too, because mariachis very much play, in my research I talk about it as a form of kind of timbred time, in which the timbre is the most important emphasis in the performance, the sound. And the rhythm and the way it's kind of stretched out and moved, all of that again is part of the expressivity of the body. Think of Frank Sinatra kind of holding out a particular phrase and just releasing it right at the moment where he feels it. And he's not quite with the orchestra, he's just like, and mariachis will do it instrumentally, so that the trumpets may be playing, the vihuela may be playing a real straight kind of bolero pattern, bum, 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 real metrical and rhythmic, and the trumpet is playing something totally like, like just really stretching the rhythm out, and it becomes very much intuitive. Mariachis play intuitively, and you learn that by the way you're trained, by osmotically, by just performing. So when I became a really good mariachi musician was when I played with a really good mariachi musician and I just imitated the way he played, and that is part of kind of the way we learn that kind of intuitive embodiment. And so exactly as Tim is saying, that when you're looking at the music, a musician, a well-experienced musician will look at eighth notes, and depending on the style, because that's the other thing is, it'll say huapango, but it's just eighth notes. A classical musician will just see eighth notes, but a mariachi musician that sees huapango will hear boom, he'll know, oh, huapango, okay. So he'll intuit how those eighth notes have to be stretched and pulled to match what the vihuela is doing, yeah.
Amazing. Well, let's hear a bit.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll step out of the way for a minute, and you've got some special guests to introduce and a couple numbers for us.
You want to hear some music?
Yeah.
All right. Well, by sheer luck, because we were supposed to have another musical group this evening that's performing in the opera, and Luckily for me, those guys had another gig. I don't know if they had another gig or not, but but they weren't able to make it this evening. So I was asked if I would be willing to bring out some of my students. So I have brought some students from the University of Texas. They are members of the Mariachi Paredes de Tejastitlán. Paredes literally means walls. A pared is a wall. It's actually, the group is actually named after a very well-known ethnomusicologist who was at UT Austin for many, many years, Americo Paredes, and his graduate students started a mariachi ensemble and named the ensemble after him, Mariachi Paredes. And then de Tejas from Texas, and then the Tejastitlán is almost like a play on Mariachi Vargas, because Mariachi Vargas is from Tecalitlan. The suffix tlan means place in the Aztec language. So tlan, anything tlan, it just means place. So Tejastitlán is Texas, the place of Texas, right? So that's that place. So I want you to give a real big round of applause, so they know they have to come out. A big round of applause for Mariachi Paredes. So, this is actually not the whole ensemble. This is a portion of the ensemble. This part is pretty much the complete rhythm section of our ensemble. And normally the ensemble at UT Austin is really a little bit more of a larger, traditional. Remember that when mariachi was in its heyday, and still very much in Mexico, mariachi ensembles run anywhere from 12 to 15 musicians. The groups you see now, they're like 3 or 4 or 5. That's the American economized version of mariachi, which I also play in, so keep that money coming. Well, trio is really not mariachi. No, it's not. A trio is a different ensemble. So sometimes, like a lot of things in Latin American culture, we tend to conflate a lot of different traditions, and especially mariachi, because we play pretty much everything. So, but anyway, normally we would have 6 violins, but we brought the prettiest violinists for you this evening to perform. And I think we're gonna start. We'll play for you first, probably the most well-known of all the mariachi songs, El Son de la Negra, which is El Son. Remember I told you the son de la Negra. La Negra is literally a black female or dark female. In most Latin American countries, the term negra, which literally means black, is a term of endearment. So it doesn't carry the same kind of connotations as it does in other cultures. So mi negrita, mi negrita, my dark-skinned woman. It's a term of endearment. Like morena, mi morenita, which is brown skin. So depending on the complexion, you can take your pick here and see who falls in what category. And then there's güerita, la güerita. So we're gonna do for you El Son de la Negra, and we're not gonna hold back, right? We're gonna give them the whole full. So brace yourselves. We're gonna try to be as energetic as we can. Thanks. So, could you notate everything you heard? So that song's written in 3/4, I'm speaking music theory now, but 3/4 just means the way the rhythms are the way the beats are divided per measure. But if you listen carefully, there's actually what's called a hemiola, which is basically a 3/4-6/8 feel. So it's a 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6. And I'm gonna have Jorge demonstrate for you. Just give him the straight down ups, down up, down up, down up, down down up, down down up, just like that. Así. So I'm gonna count it just so you can hear it. So it'll be 1 2 3 1, right? 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3. Okay. So then we'll add the guitarrón. Just play the same thing with him. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 and stop. So when you see it on paper, well, it's just written all in 3. But because, we know it's a son and it's from Jalisco, then we know that hemiola is embedded within the music. But, well, it's actually embedded in us. We have to do the interpretation. So when I play with them, I have to go, I can't play just straight 8th notes. That's all 1 2 3 1 2 3. So I have to go. On top of that, I have to add the melody because I'm just playing straight notes like that. So, but when I see my music, well, it's all written in 3, so it's just regular 8th notes. So if I was a classical musician, I would just be playing it in 3, and if a conductor was conducting, he would just be conducting it in 3. But I wouldn't be aligned with what the vihuela and the guitar are doing in the guitarrón. So that's where the difficulty in notating mariachi music, because you can't, you could, but then you'd wind up with a page that looks really, really hard to decipher. Like, it would be like a lot of markings on there. And then if you want to talk about disembodied music, well, all you're doing is mentally trying to figure out all those little dots and everything that's on there. The more you have, the more stuff you put on the page. So that's just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we were talking about this kind of embodied style of playing. And the students are still learning how to do that because the way we teach mariachi in schools now, it's very much being taught similarly to music, and there's a reason for that because, what is it? We have a curriculum, right, that we have to follow, and so because we have that curriculum, well, mariachi has to kind of follow these particular guidelines, and so teachers are really kind of put in their minds, no, you have to make sure that they know how to read this pitch, they know how to read these rhythms, and they know how to do that. So we don't necessarily have a curriculum for free-flowing music that you can just feel, and so that's part of that. But let's see, what else do I want to tell you? Well, let me tell you a little bit about the instrumentation. So originally, the peasant mariachi group was actually just a quartet. So it was only 2 violins, a harp, a little bit different than the one we have here, and an instrument called the guitarra de golpe, which is kind of if you took the vihuela and the guitar and they got married and they had a child. It's a five-stringed folk hybrid instrument, played very much like the vihuela, tuned differently, and it has a very, very kind of rustic sound. And that's another thing about mariachi. As it's become more commercialized, it's become a little bit more polished, a little bit more refined, if you will. I won't tell you that's either a good thing or a bad thing, because I have, like all of you, I'm sure, you don't want your Van Halen to be too refined, because then it loses its power. What was the meme I saw? Leave it to a high school marching band to mess up a good rock song, all right? How many times do you go to a football and you hear that rock song and you're like, they kind of got it. It's kind of the feel, but so it's kind of similarly that particular idea. So the guitarrón, Aaron, why don't you show them? Why don't you show them the front and the back of that so they can see that? The guitarrón. The guitarrón is a 6-string bass, and it's played in 2 courses. So he's actually playing 2 strings. For the most part, all of the notes that he's playing are 2 strings at the time. Why don't you show them? There's one every once in a while. His G string. He just uses one. He'll just play the G string by itself, because again, that's the technical convention. But for the most part, he's pulling 2 strings at the same time. People always say, why the hump in the back? Well, because it creates a bigger sound box, so it vibrates. And then depending on the quality of the wood and the craftsmanship, will also determine. And Aaron is very proud of this guitarrón because it was made by one of the most well-known luthiers of guitarrones in Mexico, who's already passed on. So it's kind of a vintage one that was made back in the 70s, maybe. If you looking based on the way I'm looking at it, it's probably like the 70s or the 80s. And this one was what, like $2,000? 2,000, somewhere around there? 2,200? 2,024? Price is Right. We'll have to. And standing right next to him, this is Jorge. Jorge's from Kyle, Texas, by the way. Jorge's a product of the mariachi program at Kyle, but also he's a fantastic vocalist. He was in choir for 13 years. So why don't you show him the vihuela? So the vihuela is kind of like the smaller version of the guitarrón. And you can see that, like any good mariachi, Jorge's vihuela has been through some battles. And this is a 5-string kind of rhythm tenor guitar. Why don't you play a little bit for them so they can hear that? Yeah. So, and then of course the classical guitar is the one that you guys are all familiar with. The difference between ours and maybe the acoustic guitars is that he's using nylon strings. And a pick for the, to play the rhythms and so forth. And then standing right next to me is Thomas. Thomas is all the way from Ed Couch or La Villa in Texas, all the way down on the border. And he is our harpist. Now the harp he's playing is a little bit more of a kind of a classically manufactured harp. It's kind of a cross between a folk harp and a classical harp. Not in the sense of the size or anything like that, but just the sound that it gets. It's a much more clean and kind of polished sound. The original harp of the mariachi is the arpa grande, and the difference between those two is that when you see the arpa grande, it has 3 sound holes on the front. And it has a very rustic sound. It sounds like it's out of tune sometimes, and it's not. That's the sound that it gets. And Thomas's harp has also been through a couple of battles here. But why don't you play something for them, Thomas, and so they can hear you. And then, of course, you see that they're all dressed in the traje de charro. So the conventions are always changing, but the convention is normally, the reason that mariachis wear black, by the way, these are not black. They look black, but they're actually dark blue. If you put them against black, you'll see the difference. But they're actually dark blue pinstripe. But all of the botonadura, which are the buttons on the side, that's part of the aesthetic of the style of the traje de charro. Originally, there was not a female version of the traje de charro. Only the men wore the traje de charro. But the mariachis developed kind of a feminine version for the female musicians in mariachi. And of course, the females have started to become much more prevalent in mariachi. But although you still see many of the top, prominent groups are still all male groups. Do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask real quick? I don't want to make it too long, but I'll if you have something I can answer real quick. Yes.
Maestro, you talked about the history.
Yes.
Where do you see mariachi going forward? Because I see there's some actual artists that have come up, like Peso Pluma, with a lot of influence of mariachi, and now it's very actual. But where do you see it? Where do these young, prominent artists see it?
Well, it depends on what side of the border you're on, and I don't want to take too long with the answer for that. But in Mexico, really mariachi in many places is not as reified, if you will. It's not considered a serious music. In fact, it's looked down upon as like cantina music. And so it really depends on what side of the border you're in. In the U.S., I see mariachi really where it's going to stay preserved is probably in the schools, because that's where it's become most present. That's where it's being, continuing to develop and so forth, and being influenced by, classical music and American music and so forth, as it is in Mexico as well. And the opera is an example of that, because there is this idea of wanting to elevate the status of mariachi. I'm not sure if you'll forgive me for saying it. I'm not sure that that's a good thing, but I think there's always pros and cons to that, because I think as you move it into the kind of this more operatic or maybe classical, it starts to lose a little bit of what is, it's what's considered its soul, so to speak. So it's like Dizzy Gillespie used to say, "I only read enough music not to mess up my playing." Right? And so that's, in other words, this embodiedness, that would be probably what risks being lost. Because as we move it into the art form, we start writing arrangements and sophisticated things, just like the opera. But again, then we start moving it into the more kind of written form of mariachi, and then what could be lost is the embodiment. So, but it really just depends. But I don't think it's going to go away. In Mexico, it's still very much recognized as very much like a symbol of identity and nationalism. So it's everybody knows mariachi is Mexican. So it's like tequila. It's not going anywhere. In fact, we would sound better if we had some tequila. You guys would hear us a lot better. Yeah.
Great. I would just want to say thank you so much
of
to
course.
this fine ensemble for being with us tonight. Thank you for that. It's great to hear some music, and you will. And so you also see the challenges of blending these two art forms, right? And in literally marrying them in a way that is greater than the sum of the parts, and it involves a lot of adapting and sort of learning. I'm learning a lot in rehearsals, right, of about style and the way these different things happen and feel differently than what I'm used to. And we've got a couple, we're going to go a few minutes over tonight, but we've got a couple singers here too. So I'd like for, because we thought it would be great for you to hear a couple arias. I mean, we would call them arias in opera. You might songs, but from two of our principals in Cruzar. And this first aria that you're going to hear, Quieres Ballare, and this is a mother's song. This is the deepest emotional part of the role of Renata, and she appears to her son in his dreams to reconnect with him and encourage him to leave the past and to, as every mother wishes, be happy. So please welcome our collaborative pianist Tessa Hartley and Cassandra Zoe Velasco.
Oh
Thank you, Cassandra. I think you realize when we start talking about how these things work together, how similar these art forms are. So mariachi has a strong basis in storytelling. It requires emotional commitment to that storytelling. There's a pageantry to it. And a lot of these things that are very, very similar between these art forms, and it's interesting to be blending them. A little bit about the physical production you're going to see. It's very, very striking by a very famous Broadway designer. And we have the mariachi, the trio Chapultepec, who was a really wonderful trio who were with us for the Bella Noche de Musica concert. Is part of the production and an integral part of the production. They're on stage the whole time, almost, and in various parts of the stage is kind of a Greek chorus, and they're singing and playing at the same time, oftentimes with the chorus, and really setting a tone that informs musically how this goes. And then my job then is to get the Austin Opera Orchestra to play with a little bit more mariachi flair than might normally have. And so we've got another aria for you. This is the title aria. And this is sung by the character Laurentino, around really who the story is based. And we see him at various phases of his life. But his life sets the context within which the story is told. And this aria is a really beautiful interaction between Laurentino and his granddaughter. And he's using a kind of a fairy tale allegory here to talk about the decisions that he's made in life, either by choice or by necessity, and then making that analogous to the migration of the monarch butterfly across the face. So to sing this aria, please welcome our Laurentino, Daniel Noyola.
Es la historia de un niño que miraba hacia el cielo, mirando la llegada de monarcas en vuelo. Millones volaban ya y el cielo se coloreó, pasando por la llanura, cruzándose por la luna. ¿De dónde vinieron, niño? las montañas, pensando poder volar, mas solo las mariposas cruzan la cara de la luna. ¿De dónde vinieron, niño, las mariposas en vuelo? ¿De dónde vinieron, niño, que hasta alumbraron el cielo? Que hasta alumbraron el cielo.
I think you hear that you're in for a real treat when you combine all of these elements together, which is the magic of opera, right? That we take all of these things and put that with a full orchestra and a mariachi trio and with beautiful singers and a beautiful set and a beautiful space. And we're really excited to be presenting this, as you can tell, and to be broadening the stories that are told on the Austin Opera stage. We've got time for 2 questions, if anybody has it. We'll be around after if you have more, but is there anyone with a burning desire to, all right.
No. Well, I'll give you the short answer because I actually was present when that question was asked to Pepe Martinez, who was the composer of this opera, and basically it's the sound of the vihuela and the guitarrón that really define the mariachi. Any other instruments you can have, but it's as long as you have the guitarrón and the vihuela, you could consider it mariachi. Yeah, so we could always use a sousaphone.
So yes, but we don't have a sousaphone in the Austin Opera Orchestra. So, good. Any? So yes.
So, what are some of the dance? What do people dance to, mariachi-wise, besides polka?
You should ask what they don't dance to because it's pretty much most of the music is danceable or based on dance forms. So huapangos, polkas, even the boleros, because you can dance the ballad slowly. So most of the music is I would consider dance music. It's just, we don't always do it, or we don't dance, but the people that listen to the music, certainly it's very much participatory. And yeah, I did want to say something about Pepe. I don't know if we have time really quick.
Yeah, so just to give a little context,
please.
So this is Jose Pepe Martinez, who's one of the most prolific mariachi performers and evangelists in the world. And this piece, when it was premiered at HGO and then in some subsequent productions, was done with Mariachi Vargas, which was the ensemble of which he was the head. And actually, this production, the original production, which did not have an orchestra, was just Mariachi Vargas and the cast, had quite a run. I mean, they sold out 7 performances at the Châtelet in Paris. So a very prolific piece, and largely due to Pepe, whom you knew personally.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we shouldn't have a discussion about the opera without mentioning him because he is the originator of all the music. He was the director of Mariachi Vargas de Tejastitlán from 1975 up until 2000, up until around the Paris premiere. And as I was telling Tim about it, it was actually the Paris premiere that lent a little bit to his demise because he was under a great deal of stress to get the production well established. And he had already had some health issues, diabetes and such. And so the stress of that really led to some really, really bad health problems, which then eventually led to some mental problems. Some dementia started creeping in, and then he had to step down from Vargas shortly after that. And then he kind of just wasn't himself anymore and then passed on just a few years ago. But the music, for those of us that know Pepe and know the compositions and arrangements, he has a multitude of arrangements recorded with Mariachi Vargas, iconic. He created a very large repertoire of mariachi music that is very much celebrated and respected among people that listen to music as well as those of us that perform music. But a lot of what you hear in the opera, you can hear his influences. And for those of us that know also about arranging, and Pepe himself will say this, his arrangements were always written very easy. They weren't, in the sense, sophisticated rhythmically or even chordally, and there was a reason for that. He wrote music that could be accessed by the people, and that's what his idea was. There's a lot of arrangers that want to write real sophisticated. They want to impress, and sometimes they want to impress more the other musicians more than they want to impress the audience. And Pepe always wrote something that you could hear in it, and your heart, your ear, you responded to it as a beautiful melody, and I'm not saying they weren't sophisticated, beautiful harmonies that he would write, but they were accessible. You could hear it and go, wow, that's just a gorgeous, gorgeous sound. And so I was fortunate enough to spend time with him and visit him in his home and know him for a good deal of time. And I'm sorry to see that he's gone, because if he were to see all of this, I know he would be totally amazed at his music continuing on and now speaking to a much larger audience beyond mariachi.
Yeah, he was a wonderful composer, and combined with Leonard Folia, who wrote a lot of the lyrics and wrote the book for the piece, the libretto, and what a great team and what wonderful work that they did together. And we're very happy to be presenting it here. You should know that there's a lot surrounding these performances. So for example, Jose and his ensemble, you'll be able to hear afterwards. So there will be mariachi groups after the performances playing on the terrace, and an opportunity for you to share your experience and enjoy furthering the evening a little bit. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you at Cruzar in a couple of weeks, and thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for Jose being here.